The Commodore Amiga is a great system to emulate, but it can be difficult to get set up. So, let me show you how. Hi and welcome to Bytes and Bits. Emulating the Commodore Amiga can be a bit tricky. There are lots of different models and those models have to be matched up with various BIOS ROMs and so on. So let me show you a very easy and reliable way of getting Amiga emulation up and running as quick and hassle-free as possible. So let's get straight into it. To get our Amiga emulation working, we need to download a few bits and pieces. So first off, we need the emulator itself, and we're going to be using this FS-UAE Amiga Emulator, and again you can get it from this web address here, and obviously I'll put all of the links to any of these resources in the description down below, and don't forget to also check out the main project page for this tutorial on my main bytesandbits.co.uk website. In there I can obviously give you a bit more of a help when it comes to finding ROMs and game downloads and so on, so please do check that out if you're having any problems getting hold of those files when we come to them. But the FS-UAE emulator, again, it's built around this WinUAE emulation system, but I prefer to use this one because it does give you a lot of help in setting up the different Amiga models. I'm not massively familiar with the Amiga system and which ROMs go with which model and which versions of the workbench and so on. So this does a very good job of taking all of that complexity away from you and just getting things up and running as quickly as possible. It's also available on pretty much any platform you can think of here, so your Windows, Apple and Linux distributions, and they all tend to work in a very similar fashion. So this installation process we're going through today is pretty much the same as you would use on any of those other platforms. So if we go to the download here, there are really two files that you need to download and extract. So we have the emulator and the emulator launcher. So we really need to put those into a folder on your hard drive. So if we try downloading one of those, it's best to create a specific folder for this Amiga emulator, as we need to put these two blocks of code together in their own folder. So I'm putting it into this FS-UAE folder, and I'm just going to save both of those files in here. Next, we need to get hold of some BIOS ROMs. So the Commodore Amiga used a BIOS called Kickstart, and that obviously evolved as the different models of the Amiga were released. So we do need to have a full range of these Kickstart ROMs so that we can emulate each of the different models of Amiga. When we come to use it to emulate games, you'll find that some games are set up for specific versions of the Amiga, so having all of that in place just makes everything so much easier. Now, there is actually an official and legal way to get hold of these ROMs, and that's from a website called Amiga Forever. And this company, Cloanto, they actually hold the copyright for these ROMs, and they do then offer them for download, again for a fee. So there are a couple of editions that they offer. Their value edition gives you the basic Amiga 500 setup, or there is the Plus edition, which actually gives you everything you need for all of the models, and obviously both of these include versions of Workbench, which is the sort of the Windows operating system that the Amiga used. So I would personally advise you download the Plus edition, because that will give you the full set of Amiga ROMs and Amiga Workbench versions. And it also, well, both of these versions also include a full emulator package as well, which is the Amiga Forever packaged up version of WinUAE. So again, if you do go to the expense of downloading these, then do please have a look at their inbuilt emulator, because that does just simply you install it and everything is put together for you. So it is a very easy way of doing it. But so we're looking at getting hold of our Amiga emulator, and again trying to keep the cost down as much as possible. So if you aren't going to be using Amiga forever, then obviously there are other ways of getting hold of these Kickstart ROMs. So Google, of course, if you search for Amiga Kickstart ROMs, you will fairly easily find them. If you are having any problems though, if you do find a BIOS package for one of the emulators like Batocera or RetroPie or RetroArch or so on, those tend to have the Amiga Kickstart ROMs bundled up inside there. So again, another way of just getting hold of them. But you will need these BIOS ROMs. You will not get the emulator working if you do not have them. Next, we could get hold of some Workbench ROMs. So as I said, Workbench is the windowing operating system that the Amiga used. Now, these aren't essential then for playing games, mostly, but it is worthwhile having a copy of these just so you can fully emulate the Amiga, because sometimes a few will need to go into Workbench to operate. Again, these are part of the Amiga Forever package, so if you do and get hold of one of those, you will have all the files you need. Otherwise, of course, just simply go out and search for these on the internet. We now need to get hold of some game ROMs. So there are a whole range of places where you can get hold of these, and the emulator allows you to use them in a range of formats. So for Amiga, .adf files tend to be floppy disk images. So those will be the individual disks that you would have bought your Amiga games on. Or they use a system called WHD load, which is a way that the Amiga or the emulations allow you to package up the various bits of a game so that you just have a single file to download and install. And basically these are hard disk images which get attached to your Amiga system so that you don't have to worry about multiple floppy disks and so on. Now, the emulator will allow you to use these WHD files in either zip format or LHA format, so do make sure that if you are downloading them that they come in that idea. As I say, there are a range of websites out there which allow you to get hold of these, and if you really want details on where they are, then do please have a look at the project page on my main website. The very last thing then is there is an openretro.org website which has a lot of information about retro games, and the emulator, so FS-UAE, actually allows you to connect to this to download box art and screen images of the various games, and not to also produce a list of available games so that it can understand when you try to download and install your games which ones are which. So do make sure that you create an account on this website. It is all totally free, and the emulator will of course connect to that to download all the information about the various Amiga games. So once we've got all of this set up, we are ready to install our emulator. I'm now in the folder where I downloaded those two zip files, and to install the emulator we just simply need to extract them. So if I open up that one, you'll find there's a folder called FS-UAE in the main one, and I just simply need to extract that into my folder. And then same with the launcher file, if I open that one up and then just simply extract that folder again into my main FS-UAE folder. And what we end up having then is we have two folders, and these two folders must sit like this in the same folder. If you don't have them in this arrangement, then the system won't work. And at that point we could of course delete these two zip files. So what we have here is the FS-UAE folder is the actual emulator, and that then is based on this WinUAE. We then have this launcher, and the launcher simply makes the whole process that much easier. WinUAE and FS-UAE themselves, to get games and stuff to work and various systems to work, you need to create configuration files, and that is a little bit complicated and long-winded, but the launcher then itself does all of that for you. So inside this folder, if we go inside there, You'll find that there is, for me, there's a Windows folder here. If you've installed it on Linux, you'll find there's a Linux folder. Inside that, you'll then find that you have perhaps some other folders in here. So for Windows, you will have this x86-64 folder. And then going through from that, you will eventually come to the actual launcher executable file, which is somewhere down here. So there we have our FS-UAE launcher.exe, and that is the file we need to run to actually get our launcher up and running. Now obviously having it buried way down in there isn't so much help, so we can of course just simply take that and create a shortcut somewhere else. So I'm going to create a shortcut in my main sort of folder here, so I'm just simply going to drag it up to here. And I'm going to say create a shortcut there. So now in my FS-UAE folder, I now have all of my stuff and I have my USFAE launcher program. So if I simply click on that, we should then get it up and running. And that will put us up into our main FS-UAE launcher interface. And as you can see, we have pretty much a blank canvas at the moment. Now, you can see at the moment we have an A500 model selected with a ROM, but it is saying down here that we have it's using a Kickstart ROM replacement. And of course, that offers limited compatibility. So our first job is to import those Kickstart ROMs so that we can emulate the different Amiga models. So in our main menu, which you get by just clicking on this icon, we can start to import our Kickstarts. So that brings up this dialog box here, which allows us to either import from a folder where we've downloaded some files, or we can use our Amiga Forever system. So if you have just downloaded separate files, simply click on the Browse button and find that folder. If you have got Amiga Forever, we can of course just simply select the Amiga Forever folder. So I've got that and I've installed it onto my PC. So I can simply browse there. It's in my drive E and in Amiga. And we have our Amiga Forever system here. So I can simply select that folder. And if I then click on the import, that should find those files and import them in for me. So either way round, once you've imported your Kickstart ROMs, you should find down below a checkbox to see which models you are now able to emulate. So again, using the Amiga Forever, it does make things very easy, and I now have a full set of Amiga versions which I can emulate, and that will make it much easier when I come to play my games, in that the system will be able to select anything at once and just run. So we've got our Kickstart ROMs imported. Next thing to do is we need to connect up to that OpenRetro account. So if we go to login and register, you should be able to then enter your login details for that OpenRetro account. So once you do that, we can log in, and at that point the system will start updating its database of all the games in that system. So once that's finished updating, we should then have a list of all the games for the Amiga. And again, if we simply select any of these, we'll get a few details down the bottom telling us a little bit about it, and we can see some of the screenshots and so on. And of course, this information is being pulled down from that OpenRetro account that we logged into. So we now have a list of all the games. Now, of course, we don't actually have any of these games on our system. So let's rework this list to make sure that it only lists the games which we actually do have. So again, back into our main menu, into settings. If we then go into our game database, we want to simply list the available games. And OK that. And of course, we now get back to it being totally blank. So let's import some of our games then. So what I'd done on my system was I had created a games folder inside my FS-UAE folder, and I've downloaded a number of game files into this, and those are in this LHA format, which is a WHD load file. And so in effect it is a ready-made hard disk which has all of the game files on that. So if we go back across to our emulator, so in our main menu we want to go to settings, and we want to go to our file database, and this is where we tell FS-UAE where all of the various files live, and it's already got a few that it's pre-configured itself. So when we imported our Kickstart ROMs, it's actually made a copy of those into its own little storage area, which is usually, it creates this FS-UAE folder inside your My Documents area. But we now need to add in our games folder, so we're going to add a new file source. We're going to navigate to our games folder and select that. We're then going to come out of our settings, and we're going to go up to our main menu again, and we're going to update our file database. And this should now scan all of those different folders to make sure that we haven't added any new sort of BIOSes, but also then to scan to see if we've added or changed any of our games. So it's going to go through that. It knows that we have everything, all of our different systems available. So as it scans through, it will then pick out the ones which match with games that we can play. And there we have a range of games, as you can see in here, coming up, which are now available for us to play. So the very last thing we need to do is to set up our input mapping. So you can see here that we have a joystick and mouse settings, and we also have some input mapping in this button up the top here. So I have my Xbox controller plugged in at the moment, so I'm going to use that as my Amiga joystick. So you can see here that we can select what device we want to plug into this particular port, and then what actual device that connects to on our host computer. So I'm going to set my second port then up as my actual Amiga mouse, and that's going to connect to my actual Windows mouse. And again, you can see there's other options down here which we're not going to cover in this particular tutorial. So at this point, we should be ready, if we come back out here, to play a game. So as we single select and click on a game, you can see that we get some details coming up down the bottom here about that game. So you can have a look and see what you've got in your library. If you notice this Amiga model area over here, as I select different games, some of these games are actually set up for different systems and setups. And that's why it is important to make sure that you get enough Kickstart ROMs loaded into your system, so that as it comes through, the files that you download may well be set up for particular variations of the Amiga. So having those all in place just means that these games will run without any hassle. So all that's left now then is to really run a game. So let's have a look at Alien Breed, which is one of my favourite games on the Amiga. So we double click on that. FS-UAE will automatically set everything up for you, and we're into the game. Now it can take a little bit of time for that to get set up. This WHD load system actually has to install a hard drive onto your Amiga emulator, get that all connected up, and then boot up the game. So please do give it a bit of a chance to load through. But eventually you will find that your game starts up and you can then start playing. So once you've got your game up and running, there are a few keyboard controls that you do need to be aware of. So by default, the emulator will take control of your mouse. So at my mouse is currently captured, so as I move around, I can't see my mouse cursor anymore. To get out of that, I just use my middle mouse button, and that will come back up again. And middle mouse button again to go back into the mouse within our Amiga. I can also use the F12 key to pull up a menu for my emulator running menu. Again, I need to use my keyboard keys to navigate through that, and again I can save state and reset and so on in here. One of the things I can also do is to control the floppy drives and hard drives attached to my computer or to my Amiga. So using WHD load games, obviously everything is contained within that one hard drive image. But if you were using individual floppy drives, this is where you would go to swap them in and out for second floppies and so on. And F12 again takes us back to our game. And we can of course toggle between our current windowed mode and full screen mode using the Alt-Enter combination. So Alt-Enter to get into full screen. While we're in full screen, we still have access to that emulator menu, and then Alt plus return again to get back to windowed mode. Now if we do want to make sure that our games automatically start in windowed mode, I need to close down the current emulation. I can then go to this little toggle setting here, and that will then say when we start a game to default to full screen mode. So again, if I try and start up, let's try and start up Cannon Fodder here. We can see it generating the hard disk there, attaching that onto our emulator, and then it starts off the actual emulation of that game. So it's currently booting up the Amiga and attaching in that hard drive and booting that up. So once we're in this automatic full screen, our Alt Return gives us back our Windows menu, but doesn't actually take us down to windowed mode. We do need to go into our F12 menu and close down that emulation to get back to our system. So that's pretty much everything you need to get these games up and running. The only thing that I would mess around with after this, again, there are a whole lot of other settings you can change within the emulator, but the only thing that I actually bother with is if you go into settings, we can have a play with the video settings. The Amiga, of course, was designed when we were still using CRT displays, which didn't give quite a crisp display as you get on the current LCD monitors. So we have an option to make it look slightly more realistic, and that's using scan lines. So if I turn my scan lines on, and then come back out, if I then start up a game again, so let's go back into our Alien Breed. You can see that already on the white display there and on the background here, you can start to see that it doesn't look quite as crisp. We have these scan lines, the text itself is slightly blurred around the edges, and that gives it just that little bit of a CRT feel, which again, it's entirely up to you what you prefer. But for me, that is back more to how I remember these sorts of computers when we were actually using them for real. Okay, so let me just come out of that game. Well, that pretty much wraps it up then for Amiga emulation. So hopefully you've seen that using FS-UAE makes the whole setup process very, very simple, especially if you have a good set of ROMs, such as the Amiga Forever ones. And as I say, I do highly recommend buying those just to make sure that you have everything you need for each of the models in the Amiga system. So hopefully you've enjoyed that. If you have, please do like the video and subscribe to the channel. Hit that notification bell to make sure that you get notified when my next videos are released. I look forward to seeing you again in another video very soon, and bye for now. For more games programming, electronics projects and retro gaming, please make sure you like this video, subscribe to my YouTube channel and visit my website.